All right, class, hope you're doing well. Today we are going to get into Korea, okay? And if you look here, I have a picture, okay? Hopefully you can tell what this is. This is Korea at night. There's a southern portion that's really well lit, and then there's this middle portion, or this middle section here, that's the border. And then over here up north, you'll see very, very little lights at night. China is over here. It's pretty well lit as well. Okay, so this is kind of indicative of how different things are in these two countries, which used to be one country, uh, an area that was homogeneous, pretty similar, a group of people that consider themselves to kind of be one nation, and now they live in two very different worlds. So today we're going to get into that. Okay, all right. So Why these two? Why did this one land become two? Why did it go from being uh, a land that was pretty similar, and most people said there wasn't much difference between North and South Korea, to very different worlds? Well, you got to go back to the Cold War. Cold War was this time, I don't, you'd probably say between 1948 and 1990, when the U.S. and the Soviet Union were basically chief rivals, and they never actually directly fought a war, but they both were very worried about each other. And what they did was they tried to assert control in different areas to make sure that the other didn't have the upper hand. In other words, the U.S. tried to make sure that communism was stopped in places like Vietnam, which we failed, and then over in Korea as well, while Soviet Union was also trying to keep the U.S. from making those areas capitalist. Okay, so the goal in the Cold War was to stop communism. Okay, all right, and the big communist country was actually the Soviet Union, was the ones that we were worried about. Okay, um, so after World War II, uh, these two countries, the U.S. and Soviet Union, merge as rivals, and the irony is that during World War II they were allies, and so what happens is after the war, they're in charge of rebuilding different areas that were taken over by the enemies, the Axis powers, I should say, in World War II. So Japan had control of Korea, and so after Japan loses World War II, as well as Nazi Germany, then we are in charge of rebuilding these areas. And immediately tensions arise between the Soviet Union and the US. And even though we were working together in World War II, now it's really hard for us to work together when we're trying to rebuild areas. And this led to a lot of tension. And we were supposed to make one Korea, but it just doesn't work because Soviet Union is trying to make North Korea their way, and the U.S. is trying to make South Korea our way. Okay, so the U.S. and the Soviet Union are in charge of rebuilding Korea, and the North is communist and the South is not communist. Okay, now, so there's this very, very uneasy tension. These two sides just don't see eye to eye. Their leadership is very different. Okay, and so eventually in 1950, North Korea invades South Korea. Okay, and the U.S. and the United Nations said we can't have this. We can't allow communist countries to simply take over. The feeling was if you don't stop them here, where else does communism spread? Okay, so we get involved, and initially it goes really well. And the U.S. organizes this force to defeat the communist forces that invaded, and everything is going super duper well. Okay, well, it almost goes too well because as we push up north, all of a sudden China gets scared. China is, of course, also communist at this time. And as we push north, China says, uh-oh, if they're going to mess with North Korea, then they might try to mess with us and they might try to overthrow our communist way of life. So what do? They start to support North Korea. Okay? All right. So they then push back, and when it's all over, we have the same border. Okay? So basically, after this, we have a very uncomfortable border, an uncomfortable situation where there's North Korea and there's South Korea, and the two sides don't like each other. The communists are supported by mainly the Soviet Union, but also China up in the north. South Korea, meanwhile, is supported by the United States. Okay? All right. And still today, they have a very, very tense relationship. Okay? They don't actually consider the war to be over the way that the United States and Germany and Japan consider World War II to be over, they still say they're basically that it's an armistice. They're sort of at war even though no one's fighting each other. Okay. Now, these two countries are today very, very different. Okay. North Korea, for instance, just one example, is very poor. The average North Korean is between 1 and 3 inches shorter than the average South Korean. So this is, very, very different worlds. Okay. And we'll get into how that came to be. Here's a picture of South Korea. That's Seoul, South Korea. Bright lights. Okay. A very, very prosperous country. And here's a picture of North Korea. You have children basically who are living as beggars on the streets. Okay. So this is a very, very, very different worlds. Okay. Now, South Korea today gets uh, help from the U.S. after the Korean War. Okay. And initially, South Korea was not like that prosperous country you saw in the picture. Their per capita GDP was about $158 a day in 1960, and North Korea was barely wealthier. So North Korea at one time was actually doing a little better than South Korea. Okay, and most people say the change didn't really begin until the 1970s. Now, to give you a comparison, the U.S. per capita GDP at this time was $3,000. So the U.S. was doing way better than South Korea, and South Korea was still a very poor country. Now, the U.S. eventually gives aid in the form of low interest loans, and basically South Korea becomes a lot wealthier. Today, South Korea's per capita GDP is like 26,000. North Korea's is only $1,300. So today, South Korea is much, much wealthier. And this is a success story for the U.S. that we gave them this aid and that they benefited. Today, South Korea's government is also democratic, and basically the and so today they are an ally of ours. Okay. Um, Now they're still very worried about North Korea, and we're still concerned about that situation. And we still have troops. We still basically are an ally of South Korea. Okay. All right. And then we have North Korea. Okay. I'm going to get into what life is like in North Korea um, on your next lesson. But as a preview, kind of, what I'm going to have you do is we're going to watch this video about North Korea. It's a very, very interesting piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and show it on here. Okay, I'm going to show you this video about North Korea. Very, very interesting one. These are the people that actually, if you know anything about Dennis Rodman, these are the people that sent Dennis Rodman to North Korea. Now, this one here, is different. This is one they did a few years before that. Okay. Also, by the way, these people do some pretty crazy things in the video. I would not advise that you do that. But anyways, I'm going to shut up because the video is more interesting than me. And here we go.
임의무력부장 동지, 열병부대들은 조선노동당 창건 예순도 경투 경기도 왜 왔습니까?
Right after we launched VBS, people started saying, North Korea, why don't you go to North Korea? Why? Because nobody knows anything about North Korea. So we were fascinated by it, and we tried to get in for a year and a half, but couldn't, because North Korea doesn't let anyone in. They do not want anyone to corrupt their 100% homogenous society that is 100% ruled by one person, Kim Jong-un. In the end, we just got so frustrated that we ended up flying to South Korea and saying, well, at least we can go to the DMZ and sort of put our foot into North Korea and sort of at least see a little bit of it from the south. Let's go see the DMZ, which is the Demilitarized Zone, which is the border between North Korea and South Korea. Since the Korean War ended, it's been the most militarized zone on Earth, with 2 million estimated troops on the North Korean side, about 500,000 on the South Korean side, missiles pointed at each other, artillery, tanks. There's 3 million mines on the border itself. In fact, there's so many mines that the North Koreans built invasion tunnels where they went 70 meters down, and they're like, we can be in Seoul in an hour and a half. Now, the CIA and the American Army have found a number of these, but they think that there's even more. It's been called the end of the world, and it's the closest you can get to seeing North Korea. Getting to the DMZ isn't easy. It's only an hour and a half north of Seoul, but you have to go through about 15 checkpoints. Then you have to go through a United Nations sort of indoctrination session where they're like, don't point, don't look at them, don't take any pictures, don't do anything. We're only going to be there for 2.5 minutes. So we're at the last stop in South Korea before going to the DMZ. This here is Freedom Bridge. Right after the Korean War, it was the last time the North and South exchanged POWs. And on the other side of that now, a little further back, is North Korea. Right here, it's kind of like a theme park, but as you see, like just beyond the theme park, kind of hidden by the trees, there's barbed wire and landmines and checkpoints everywhere. So it's kind of a very bizarre theme park. So a lot of families come and they put up messages or prayers for their family in the North that they've been split and never allowed to see. So they all come here and make a pilgrimage and say, okay, this is what I'm going to put up. Someone's put up some golf balls there.
I think the South's going to lose pretty damn quick. They're going to be sort of rave soldiers brought up on PlayStation versus the North Koreans who eat grass and sleep with their AK. We're going to Checkpoint Charlie. This is one of the most dangerous places in the world. They have 2 million troops ready to come over here.
And so you get off the bus and you look across and there's North Korea. They're like, that's North Korea. Get back on the bus. You know, if you could start World War III. They really get you terrified. They let you into one barracks room, and the barracks room is half in North Korea, half in South Korea. And they set that up so that they could have talks. But it's the only place where you can go and actually set foot, technically, into North Korea. And this is as close as 99.9% of the people in the world will ever get to getting into North Korea. And people are like, that's North Korea.
So that piece of concrete
That
is...
concrete, so the gravel is south, the concrete is demarcation line, and the sand is north. The what? Oh, right. No finger pointing.
You can take a picture with the 2 soldiers.
And we're like, dude, we have to get into North Korea. We have to get in.
If the enemy dares to invade the land of Korea even an inch, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Korea, where the whole country has been turned into an impregnable fortress and the whole people have been equipped with arms, will smite aggressors mercilessly.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
All right, so they do end up getting to North Korea, and I'm gonna pause it. I mean, I have to start a new video because this program only lets me do 15-minute chunks. Okay, so watch the next video to see how they get into North Korea.